Imagine waking up every day a stranger in your own body. Some days, I don't even know which version of me is the one that's waking up. Living with a dissociative condition whilst also living with the gender dysphoria that is common within the transgender community is like playing a game where the rules keep changing. So how do you find yourself when yourself keeps changing? So let's talk about it. Here is my story so far. So for transparency, I am currently under diagnosis for a dissociative condition, most likely dissociative identity disorder or OSDD. However, that particular diagnosis can take years to get made official. Now, one of the few memories that I can still access from my childhood, I distinctly remember thinking, I wouldn't mind being a girl, but at the same time, I don't mind being a boy either. So needless to say, I had some complicated feelings even at that age, which, much like my autism diagnosis, went undiagnosed until very, very recently. Now, even as a young child, I was going to say small child, but I was a small child until I was like 19 years old. Ever since I was a young child, I never really felt connected to the concept of my own internal sense of gender. People saw me as a boy, so I just kind of went with it, even if it never really felt right. That's not to say I necessarily felt like a girl either. I just felt like I existed. I didn't really feel like anything. And I lived with that buried away until, well, within the last few years, prior to my most recent dissociative flare-up, when courtesy of a lot of therapy, I went on a bit of a journey of self-discovery. That journey led to the realization that I fell somewhere on the gender fluid spectrum, falling under the trans/non-binary umbrella. Although there was a brief experimentation with the concept of being a femboy, that part of the timeline was very brief, and for the most part, luckily not documented. As to why that's lucky, I kind of consider that to be the closest to a baby trans phase, shall we say. And I cringe a little whenever I happen to look back at the few photos that do exist from that time. Now, for those unfamiliar with the concept of gender dysphoria, it's a term used to describe the distress that might commonly be felt when a person's internal sense of gender doesn't necessarily match up with their external or assigned physical gender. Now, not every transgender person will experience dysphoria, but it is definitely not uncommon. And living with this dysphoria, it often leads to people living with anxiety, eating disorders, depression, and in some extreme cases, ending of things. With the main ways of dealing with or treating people with gender dysphoria, with things like, therapy, or for a lot of people, transitioning. For some it's just social transitioning. That's often enough to ease it back, and others, they will go the medical transition route as well. And that can often work for them. There is no one answer that is going to work for every person. For me, because I didn't really feel connected to any one gender, presenting only as boy always kind of just felt off. But because I have a tendency to over-research anything that has to do with my health, I ended up finding an answer for me being going on HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. I found a nearby doctor who just so happened to have a special interest in trans healthcare, explained my thought process in sort of wanting to become, more androgynous or slightly more feminized than I currently was. Went through the rigmarole that was the Australian medical paperwork, got my blood work done, and away we go. Initially just kind of starting with estrogen monotherapy, in my case being pills, just to kind of start feminizing things a little bit. And then about 12 months in, we kind of threw in some testosterone blockers and progesterone to really kind of just boost those results a little bit further. And lo and behold, that brought me to a point of feminine androgyny to put my brain at a level to what it wanted to feel. Now, how does this tie into living with a dissociative condition? glad you asked. Well, not long after that, due to certain life stresses, I'm not sure if I've talked about it in previous videos, but I can talk about it in another one later, potentially. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to. Anyway, we had a major dissociative flare-up, and that's where the fun began anew for our dysphoria. Now, through all of this time, the main host prior was Riley, who had been the primary host of the system, running solo pretty much up until we discovered we were a system. And so after all this time, their dysphoria got dealt with, and now they were gone. But because HRT had made certain changes to the body, with each new alter that came forward, began a new dysphoric crisis. Now, for a lot of dissociative systems, alters of different internal genders, ages, in some cases even species, are not uncommon. And while I can't necessarily speak for them, I definitely found that the further away from their perceived self-identity our appearance was, the greater the sense of dysphoria became. Complicated by the addition of the fact that we were now occupying a less than traditional body. For reference, this is me now. As you can see, some feminine features, but otherwise still somewhat androgynous. This was roughly the desired appearance for Riley that managed to resolve their dysphoria. I, as the current host, experienced the least dysphoria, relatively speaking, as I am probably the closest mentally to our previous host, Riley. However, other prominent members within the system were not so lucky. Mina, a female identifying alter that was introduced in a previous video, she experiences dysphoria due to the fact that, if anything, she wants to take the gender transition even further. She wants to make the body as feminine as we could get, regularly expressing a desire to even get things like FFS, or facial feminization surgery, as well as thoughts of gender reassignment surgery as well. Something that, for multiple reasons, is not really feasible at this point in time. Whereas male alters like Mike, for example, generally feel feelings of distress at being perceived as anything other than just man. And if in front for any length of time, we'll often try to minimize a lot of the appearances of any of these HRT changes, often remaining unshaven, binding the chest to achieve that more sort of masculine shape, and wearing outfits that tend to put more focus on the shoulders or the arms as opposed to anything that might be perceived as feminine. The child alters, while identifying generally as girls, they don't really get the gender dysphoria, they don't really care. They more get it from the fact that when they look in the mirror, they're like 3 foot taller than they perceive themselves. It's kind of like a Tom Hanks in Big or a Jennifer Garner in 13 going on 30 situation for them. And the non-human alters, well, they don't really care. After all, what's one body to another, realistically, for them? They were never going to care either way. One opinion that does seem to be shared universally amongst the system, for different reason: boobs are great. Myself and Mina, we both find them pretty affirming from a dysphoria mindset, although, a little bit more wouldn't go astray. And while many of the males in the system probably would prefer that they not be there, we'll nearly always stop when walking past a mirror and essentially just doing the non-verbal equivalent of nice. So on an average day, due to the fact that it's kind of unpredictable as to when a switch might occur, I generally try to keep my presentation fairly gender neutral. There's not really any winners, but it does reduce the odds of any unnecessary stress if, for example, we happen to present on one particular way and someone switches throughout the day, and therefore they're then stuck dealing with looking the way they would not like to look. It's not a perfect solution, but it works for us. And generally speaking, for the sake of convenience, we'll generally just go by whatever pronouns people want to call us. He, she, they, it, whatever. As long as you aren't being a dick about it, we don't really care. Anyway, that's all from me today. Feel free to check out some of our other videos if you're still curious. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you would just wish to see more videos from us. Also, feel free to leave anything in the comments if you've got any questions or if there's any topics you'd like us to cover in future videos. Or come check me out on Twitch. It's the same username as this channel, where I do plan to hopefully get back into more regular streaming, regular games and chatting and so on. Have a great day everyone, keep it real.